Have you ever been advised to stop proteins because your uric acid was high? Or heard that consuming proteins for prolonged periods of time will lead to kidney damage? Or maybe you've been warned that proteins are mainly for gym-goers and bodybuilders. Or maybe that proteins work like steroids. Or that proteins are not healthy for the elderly. The truth? These are all myths with very little science backing these claims. I have received thousands of questions and messages about these from so many of you after listening to my previous videos on whey proteins, and today I'm going to set the record straight. Let's debunk all of these myths one by one using entire science and no fluff, and also stick around till the end because I'm going to tackle some of the common misconceptions around whey proteins. So let's dive straight in and tease out facts from fiction. Welcome to Health and Nutrition with Sabyasachi. Today we are going to look at some of the myths that are surrounding whey proteins and generally protein consumption. If you're wondering what that wheel is on your left, it's really all the sequences which leads to amino acids, and all amino acids put together lead to proteins, right? So there are some myths which all of you have asked me about, and today we are going to clear some of them. So the overview is you need to understand some of the common myths surrounding proteins, and then you need to do it yourself, right? So it's your meal, it's your proteins, your body, and your fitness, and you need to prioritize it. So with this and previous knowledge of some of the whey proteins that we have talked about, I think it will make a nice package for you to start implementing proteins into your daily lives. And then we'll also look at some of the do's and don'ts about protein supplements that you must know. Before that, I have to thank each one of you for subscribing to my channel and really motivating me to create more and more content. By the time I was making this video, I had already crossed about 1,500 subscribers over the last couple of months or so. That's quite a rapid rise, and I'm really happy about all of this attention that I'm getting. Unfortunately, when I look at some of these metrics, about 13% of you have subscribed, and a lot of you have not subscribed. A lot of good stuff is coming your way, including stuff about whey proteins, creatine, lipid profiles, and good fats and micronutrients, magnesium, and so many other things. So I'm hoping that more of you will sort of subscribe to the channel and stay tuned, and really continue to keep motivating me. So these are some of the queries, and I'm going to enlist them right in the beginning, and then we'll tackle each one of them. So first and foremost is raised uric acid, and that high protein diet causes raised uric acid levels, and that is a definite myth, and I'll show you why. Right, protein supplements damage your kidneys is the second myth that we'll tackle, and we'll look at creatinine and its association to protein consumption and relationship between the glomerular filtration rate and proteins. Then we'll look at protein supplements causing bloating and indigestion. And this is not uncommon, and some of you may also be facing that. But then there are some myths and ways that you can overcome that, and that is what we'll look at in addition to problems like constipation with whey protein supplements. The other queries that I have got is that proteins are generally for gym goers and bodybuilders. Doc, why are you advising me to take proteins? But then I will really understand that that is not the case. And other common myths are that we get enough proteins from a typical Indian diet. A lot of influencers out there are actually peddling this, but unfortunately that's not the truth. That's because Indian diets are rich in carbohydrates but exceedingly poor in proteins, and I'll show you some examples. Then we'll deal with the myth that more protein is equal to more muscle. You really have to, this is not an automatic process, you have to work for it. And I've got messages from a lot of young girls as well as women saying that will I become too bulky if I continue, if I consume proteins? And that is not the case. And then we'll look a little bit deep into the science of bulk and proteins. Then there are other queries where people have put out and asked me, can I consume more than 30 grams of protein in one sitting? And is there a limit to how much protein I can consume in a sitting? Then we look at protein supplements are unnatural or like steroids. This is really mothers and grandmothers perhaps telling you that, oh, these are steroids, don't take it. And so we'll see what are the differences and what these whey protein supplements have and what they're not. And then I commonly see this where people have started taking proteins and are feeling really good about themselves. They are losing weight and everything is focused on proteins. And people think that if I eat proteins, I don't need to worry about other macros and other micros. Right? So we'll take a little bit of look at why this may not always be true. Then high protein diets are not suitable for the elderly or older adults, maybe your parents or maybe even your grandparents, right? So this is a real myth that we need to understand. So you're realizing that proteins are important for almost all age groups. They help with different kinds of activities, but it's really important for all age groups, right? And then proteins for muscle and not for weight loss and health is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, right? So proteins are really, really important for weight loss and muscle because they give you satiety and many other things. So we'll take a look at that. And then all whey protein powders are the same is what a lot of people tell me, but that's not the case. Lastly, we'll look at whether plant proteins are just as good as animal proteins or not, and there are a nuanced way of looking at it, and the answer is almost yes and no both. So we'll take a closer look at that. And then lastly, we'll look at the timing of whey proteins. And people say the timing matters and that you should take it within 30 minutes of your workout or your exercise or even within getting up, right? So how close is that to reality? And if are our muscles really sitting with a stopwatch is something that we'll try and discover. So with this background, let's dive into each one of them, right? The first one is protein causes raised uric acid, right? So this is not true, but to understand this, we need to get into the depths of uric acid metabolism and please indulge for the next couple of minutes so that you'll understand that this is not at all the case. And so this is really a myth. What is the source of uric acid in the body? Uric acid is really a waste product, right? And it comes from a substance called purines, right? And purines are the primary source of uric acid. And where do these purines come from? They come from endogenous production, that is, breakdown of DNA, RNA, and other dying cells in the body. Like cells in your mouth or on your skin or in your bone marrow are working really hard, right? And then many millions of cells are dying every day and new cells are coming up and replacing them, right? So when those cells are dying, all that content inside the cells, especially their DNA and RNA, are where purines come from. So all of that are broken down into hypoxanthine, xanthine, and then uric acid, right? So purine metabolism predominantly is an endogenous production from the cell turnover in your body. Dietary purines are responsible for only 30% of the uric acid production, and that too comes from red meat organs, like liver and brain. People have kaleji fry and bheja fry, something like that, or shellfish or certain lentils and some forms of beer, right? So so these are the sources of purines which will lead to high uric acid production, right? So as you can see, dietary protein does not lead to too much of uric acid production. The other important and most common source of uric acid is fructose. Fructose really is, what's present in fruits. It's a sugar in fruits. It's the major contributor of uric acid in modern diets. And fructose is, abundantly present in soft drinks, fruit juices, sweets, processed foods. So anything that tastes sweet is nothing but fructose, right? So what happens is when you consume these and body is in a well-fed state that is already has a lot of glucose, this fructose is going to actually get converted using, if you see this diagram, fructose will get converted into fructose 1-phosphate inside the liver cells, and this is done using an enzyme called fructokinase. That enzyme requires a lot of ATP. ATP is the energy molecule in your body, or the adenosine triphosphate. So the ATP is utilized on this step, and ATP then gets broken down into AMP, or adenosine monophosphate, which then gets depleted to hypoxanthine and uric acid. So a lot of uric acid is produced when you consume fructose. In fact, a spike of uric acid happens within 30 minutes of high fructose intake, right? Including chips which have corn syrup and fruit juices and all of these, right? So The clinical link overall is that high fructose diets are therefore strongly associated with hyperuricemia, that is higher uric acid levels, fatty liver, and insulin resistance that we'll talk about a little bit later, right? So fructose is a far more contributor to uric acid levels than dietary purines. Right, I have talked more in detail about these in one of the previous videos, and where I talk about mango, in general any fruits and fruit juices, and you can take a closer look at that. The third is alcohol. Right, all of us love beer, right? I do, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well. So beer is high in purines. Some forms of beer definitely are high in purines that lead to increase in lactate production, which reduces uric acid excretion. So kidney is not able to throw out that uric acid. That's because of beer. Other spirits such as wine and alcohol, they have less amount of purine. However, all this alcohol or ethanol metabolizes to NADH, increases lactate and leads to impaired uric acid excretion. Finally, the mechanism is the same, that the kidney is not able to throw it out from the body, right? So that's what alcohol does. Next is high protein diets. It's an indirect mechanism. Animal proteins. So these are small purine contributions, like I already said. Whey proteins, eggs, dairy have very low purine content. So these causing raised uric acid levels is almost impossible. The myth that protein is equal to uric acid is largely unfounded, right? Unless you're consuming a lot of red meat, especially organs like livers and brain of animals, right? Which is, I don't think, very common nowadays, right? So proteins leading to high uric acid is a myth. Then the big daddy in the room amongst all of this is insulin and insulin resistance. I've talked a lot about this in some of my previous videos, and you can take a look at what is hyperinsulinemia or insulin resistance. That is, your body stops responding to insulin, and glucose keeps rising, building, and leads to diabetes. And so the first step of all major illnesses is insulin resistance. So hyperinsulinemia or higher insulin in your circulation, it stimulates renal urate reabsorption via some transporters like URAT1 and GLUT9. These are some very depth information that many of you may or may not be interested in, but I've still put it out. The mechanism is something that we must understand, right? So the insulin stimulates renal reabsorption. So the kidney is again not able to throw out that uric acid. It is getting filtered and into the urine, but the kidney is reabsorbing it back. That's under the influence of high insulin levels. This leads to high serum uric acid levels. Despite normal or even low intake, obesity and fatty liver exacerbate this by increasing purine turnover. Right? And I've talked about this in previous videos, as you can go through that. But overall clinical link is that hyperuricemia, that is high uric acid levels, is strongly associated with type 2 diabetes, obesity, and hypertension. So unless these things are taken care of, the uric acid levels are not going to go down. Stopping proteins is not the answer for high uric acid levels. Other contributors like rapid turnover for people who have some form of cancers, chronic kidney disease, of course, dehydration and low urine volume is really important, right? So, make sure you're drinking enough of water along with your proteins and whey intakes, and very high salt intake also worsens insulin resistance. So try and not have too much salt. So overall take home message with uric acid is the real culprits is not protein, it's not the whey or eggs. It's fructose and sugary fruits, beer and alcohol, and insulin resistance impairing excretion. In fact, whey protein and plant proteins are actually safe choices for those worried about uric acid, provided your kidney function is normal, right? So remember that to reduce your uric acid, you need to cut the sweet tasting things, the junk food, the sugary food, as well as your beer and forms of alcohol, right? The next misconception is, too much of protein causes kidney damage, right? So when you're looking at kidneys, these are the renal function tests which you need to do at baseline. Your serum creatinine, blood urea nitrogen, and the glomerular filtration rate. If all of these are normal, then you are good to go. And most people below 60 years of age should have these within normal limits. So how this translates is the safe limit is 1.5 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight, even in sedentary individuals, right? So if you are say a 70 kilo person, then you can actually have 100 or 105 grams of protein easily and not cause any problems to your kidneys. So 2 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight is safe for those doing strenuous activities even weightlifting, endurance running, they need more proteins because there is a lot of muscle breakdown, and therefore higher doses are or higher consumption. So I actually consume 2 grams per kilogram body weight. That's about 160 grams protein a day, and it doesn't affect my kidneys over the last 1.5 years. Remember that 80% of the protein that you consume should be dietary, and only 20% should be from the whey or plant supplement protein. Plant protein is safer than animal sources, where we are looking at animal sources being red meats, right? Otherwise, chicken and egg are definitely as safe. But red meat, and as we've already seen, this can cause uric acids to go high, as well as can start affecting the kidney in the long run. After age 50, especially if you're taking high quality, high protein intake, you need to check your renal profile on an annual basis, because never say never. In medicine, anything can happen, but this is not the rule but an exception. Remember to drink at least 2 liters of water if you are consuming high protein meals, so that it helps the kidney flush it out, right? So with normal kidneys, in a high protein diet does not cause problems. The next is bloating and indigestion, and this is reality. This is not really a myth, but what causes this and how you can get over this is something that we'll discuss. So why do protein supplements cause bloating? And first and foremost is the lactose content. Many of us don't know we are lactose intolerant, and so as soon as you start consuming whey or some form of supplements, you'll start getting this aches and cramps in your stomach. So lactose is very much more in whey concentrates and has so much more than whey isolates, right? So if you're consuming pure whey concentrate, your chances of bloating and all these problems are high, right? So people with lactose intolerance, especially if you have, it's there in about 15 to 20% of the population. So you may be one of those who are lactose intolerant, and lactose intolerance will lead to gas, bloating, loose stools, and therefore it is better to switch to whey isolate, right? Pure whey isolate, and maybe the unflavored ones, which may be better tolerated. More than lactose, what is more causative are additives and fillers. These are the main culprits, right? It's not often the protein itself, but what's added to that protein supplement. Important ones being artificial sweeteners and sugar alcohols. So sorbitol, malitol, erythritol, a lot of these are present in a lot of the proteins that we consume. They get fermented in the gut. That definitely leads to gas and bloating. Thickeners and gums, very common. You will see these in so many protein powders. Xanthan gum, guar gum. These increase viscosity, right? They make the protein thick. So there is slower digestion, better satiety over long periods of time. But these unfortunately will cause some form of gas production. Soy lecithin, another important one. This is used as an emulsifier, so that the protein sticks nicely and gets mixed nicely into the milk. But very little amounts of these are used, but this can be sensitive, irritating to a sensitive gut. So sunflower lecithin is the alternate, which is a better one. So look for those. Sometimes your proteins may also have certain other additives or performance boosters that you are not aware of, such as creatine and caffeine and some others, right? These can definitely worsen bloating if not disclosed clearly, right? So we'll have a whole video on creatine in the next couple of weeks. So it's important to have micronized creatine. That will be easy on your gut. But then if creatine is being added to whey supplements, it likely is not micronized, and it will definitely cause some form of your gut problems like bloating. Excess dose at once. If you're slamming 40, 50, 60 grams of protein, say taking 2 scoops straight away into like 400 ml of milk, you're going to have like 60 grams of protein straight up, and that's going to cause problems. So go gentle and start with smaller doses and then creep up if you want to. Low quality protein sources are again important. So cheap blends may include low grade whey with impurities, and there is something called amino acid spiking or even non-dairy spiking, where people are adding things like collagen or glycine, which don't digest so well, especially when mixed with whey, right? So these will also cause bloating. Important to also note that you look for protein powders which have digestive enzymes. Many good proteins or whey isolates have lactase, protease and amylase, and these will help break down those proteins so much better and make it easy for digestion. There are certain brands which talk about dizyme or prohydrolase. So these are the terminologies that you can also look for if you don't see lactase and protease and amylase. And also probiotics in some protein brands do help, so especially in those who have, gut, we call it gut dysbiosis, and we'll have a whole session on gut health in the future, right? But then probiotics in that protein supplement will also help reduce your, bloating and indigestion. So overall practical tips are, if you need to switch from a concentrate to pure isolate if bloating is persistent, check the labels, avoid products loaded with artificial sweeteners and especially thickeners, xanthan gum, guar gum, and all of those. Try smaller doses in the beginning. Choose brands with added enzymes if you are sensitive still, and probiotics and fermented food, especially Greek yogurt and kefir, things like that may help overcome or increase your overall gut tolerance. So we'll talk more about these in the episode, in the episodes in the future on gut health. But for now, this is what you can remember. I've talked so much more about these, and I have actually developed a whey protein purity calculator, and this is how it looks like. So if you see, I've talked about sourcing and extraction, the type sweeteners, and all of this, right? And this is an interactive scoring sheet, link to which will be in the description as well as in the previous video, and you can take a look at that, right? So higher the score, the better the protein quality and the lesser the bloating, and more tolerable that is. The next is Indian meal has enough protein. If you look at this plate of protein, perhaps from a North Indian family, you will see that there is rice, which is almost entirely carb. These are some maida parathas, which is also carb. This is some potato and sabzi, which is also predominantly carb. These are some chole, which have some protein, and this is paneer, which is definitely good source of protein, right? So yet if you take out this paneer, almost entirely what remains back is carb. This is perhaps a South Indian meal where you can see there is some non-veg here, but still predominantly rice, so much of rice, and a lot of these are all carbohydrates, right? So I have talked so much more about this, where I talk about that you're not eating enough proteins and you can design your plate, and this is a video that all of you could catch, right? So please take a look at that. And that is where I talk about designing meals which are low carbohydrates, high proteins, and I've shown so many examples of my own plates, almost 10 to 12 different ideas that you could adopt, right? So when you look at the protein content of plant-based foods, if we won't go too much into the details, but you will realize that this is actually far lower than what is desired. And this is dairy-based foods. Again, overall protein content in dairy-based foods is not that high, right? So this is how you calculate how much protein you need per day, right? So this is based on how much activity you do, and so very active individual will need about 1.8 grams per kilogram, and a combination of very active and all of these others like cycling, swimming, running, someone like me needs about 2 grams per kilogram body weight, right? And that is ideal body weight, right? So if your ideal body weight is 80 kilograms, you need more amount of proteins. If your ideal body weight is 90 kilograms, that means you're much taller. And this is calculated using the body mass index formula, which I have discussed in the previous lectures as well, right? So generally a sedentary Indian would need about 70 to maybe 75 grams of protein per day, and an active individual will need about 100 to 120 grams per day. And when you look at your meals, you'll realize that most Indian diets are protein deficient. The next myth is, protein is mainly for gym goers and bodybuilders. That's not entirely true. Maybe these groups require more amount of protein. However, protein is essential for everyone, not just athletes. Why? Is children need it for growth and brain development, adults need it for tissue repair, hormone regulation, and immunity. Older adults need it to prevent sarcopenia or muscle loss. They don't want to be frail. It supports their mobility. And of course, weight management. So protein keeps you full for longer periods of time, helps fat loss while preserving muscle. And this is really important. Intermittent fasting, that I've also talked about plenty in some of the previous videos, is almost impossible, right? So carb restricting and intermittent fasting is almost impossible unless you're fulfilling your entire protein requirements, right? So for losing weight and for being fitter, protein is absolutely essential. So the science behind this is that the body constantly is breaking down all these proteins. Muscles are getting broken down, enzymes, hormones are getting utilized, new ones are being made. So daily turnover is about 250 to 300 grams of protein, right? So you need to at least have about 100 grams of protein every day, right? Rest will be recycled, but having about 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight is extremely important for optimal health. So you'll realize that this is pretty much for everyone, right? So take home message is that protein is for life. It's not just for the gym. The next myth is that more protein is equal to more muscle, and that happens automatically, and that protein makes women bulky. Now, this is pretty far from the truth. When you take protein, you don't get a body just like that. You have to work for it. And when women start taking protein, they just don't automatically translate into this kind of big bodied and very bulky, right? So this does not happen. So the truth is that protein is the raw material. It's not the builder. Muscle hypertrophy, that is thick big muscles, require two things. One is resistance training, that's the stimulus, and adequate protein, that's the substrate. Right? So without training, excess protein is just energy, and it is not muscle, and it's just going to be excreted out, or it's going to be burned for other things, right? So the science really is that muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, occurs when protein intake supplies amino acids, especially something called leucine, that's the big one for muscle building, and resistance training triggers signaling pathways such as mTOR, right? So these may be too geeky for you, and you may not remember these, but remember that without training there is minimal increase in muscle protein synthesis. Right? So more protein beyond needs is either oxidized or stored as fat, right? So you might not as well consume it. So overall, women don't bulk up like men. That's because women have 15x lower testosterone than men, which is very important for muscle hypertrophy. Muscle gain is slower and they are always leaner, leads to tone, not bulk. Right? So the benefits are better metabolism. So higher protein means better metabolism, improved bone health, and fat loss and strength. Women actually need more protein as they age, and to especially fight sarcopenia. And protein has to be part of their meals, especially additional whey proteins if your diet is not giving you enough proteins when you are perimenopausal. So overall take home message is protein fuels muscle growth, but only when you train for it. For women, proteins give tone, strength, and health, not bulk. The other misconception is you can't absorb more than 30 grams of protein in one sitting, right? So the real truth is there are no hard cutoffs. Body absorbs almost everything. Almost all protein you give it. Right? What changes is the rate of muscle protein synthesis. I already talked about this before, right? So which levels up at about 40 grams for most people. So the extra protein is still useful. It will be not just for muscle, but other things like your skin, your hair, enzymes, hormones. So if you're protein deficient, you will start noticing hair falls, right? So that's the first symptom, especially in perimenopausal women, right? So protein also aids in satiety and metabolic health. So the science is that studies have shown no upper limit for absorption, but muscle protein synthesis or muscle bulking, it arrests at about 40 grams. Beyond that, whole body protein turnover is utilized, right? So it's good to spread the protein across meals. So practical takeaway is that absorption doesn't mean muscle growth. You can absorb more than 30 grams, definitely. It's good to distribute your proteins. Important is to prioritize quality. That is the complete amino acid profile, especially leucine rich, and combine it with resistance training. And take home here is that no, there is no 30 gram limit. Your body uses what you give it, right? So the best results, spread your protein intake through the day, right? So if you need like 80 grams, maybe you can do 30, 30 and 20 or something like that, right? So instead of taking all at once. The next myth is that protein supplements are unnatural or like steroids. So again, this is as far from the truth as possible. Right, so what is a protein supplement is whey protein, is product of cheese making, and plant proteins are derived from peas, soy and rice. Right, so these are protein powders, are really food in powdered form. These are dried, filtered proteins. There are no hormones and no steroids. What they are not? They're not anabolic steroids, right? They're not synthetic drugs. They do not alter hormones. They're not called pharmaceuticals. They're called nutraceuticals, right? That's because they are naturally occurring. And there is no unnatural muscle growth if you just consume proteins, right? So think of whey protein as a concentrated milk protein, a convenient measured source of nutrition. The next myth is that if I eat protein, I don't need to worry about other macros. People start feeling good, start losing weight, and purely focus on proteins, but then there are so many other macro and micronutrients that I've listed here and that we'll talk much more in detail in some of the upcoming videos. The myth is that protein alone is equal to complete nutrition. Unfortunately, again, not true. Protein is essential but not enough on its own, right? Your body also needs some fat for hormone, brain and cell membranes, and low GI carbs and some fiber, right? So for energy and gut health, especially for preventing constipations. So why other macros? So little going into more details. Healthy fats like omega-3 fatty acids and monounsaturated fatty acids that we'll look at in some of the next lectures in the lipid science playlist. It's important for the heart and brain health, like really important. Aids absorption of vitamin A, D, E and K, extremely important for functioning of the body. Like low carbohydrate vegetables and fiber in control blood sugar and insulin. They prevent sudden rise or spikes in insulin. And micronutrients are often missed if you're mainly concentrating on protein, right? So you may not be consuming enough magnesium and enough iron and many of the others, right? So don't, really focus much on proteins alone. The science is that high protein, zero fat diet will lead to risk of hormone imbalances and fatigue, and very common in women who are, purely high protein and not having any ghee or any butter or any fats. Zero carb diets are nutrient deficient. Right? Poor exercise recovery is the rule here. So if you are actually working out or running, you will need some amount of carb loading. The best approach therefore is concentrate predominantly of protein but also have good fat and control your carbs. So overall take home is protein is the cornerstone, but balance builds the house. The next and very common misconception is that elderly people should avoid high protein. It's bad for their kidneys and for their health. The truth is that older people need more protein, not less, right? So aging is equal to natural muscle loss. That's called sarcopenia, right? You can Google and read much more about sarcopenia, right? And they have slower recovery. So adequate protein is extremely important for preserving muscle strength, bone health, and mobility, right? So the science says that, elderly need as much protein as any healthy young individual, and that is the same, that is 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight, right? That's because it's very important. Muscle is less sensitive to proteins with age, right? So more proteins as well as some amount of resistance training is really important, right? So if you have a grandmother who is finding it hard to walk, give her good proteins and ask her to lift a 500 ml of bottle, 500 ml, say any bottle with 500 ml of water and like a dumbbell and use it, and you'll see their mobility improve. So it's really, really important, and especially for those who have healthy kidneys, this should be done. So overall take home is that protein is equal to independence in old age. Who wants to hold and walk or use a crutch? It preserves muscle and bones, prevents frailty, boosts quality of life. And I think these are very much priorities for the elderly. The next myth that we're going to look at is protein quality and timing. So then mainly is whether we are looking at whey or plant protein supplements, and it's important that you choose the right one for yourself. I have talked a lot about this in some of the previous videos and so much in detail. It's almost a 30-35 minute lecture on whey versus plant, and also I have given you a it's a questionnaire that you can use and a scoring system which will help you choose the better one, whey versus plant. So I won't go too much into details. Generally the pros and cons of each. So whey protein pros are it's a complete protein, that is it has all the 9 amino acids, especially high in leucine, which is important for muscle protein synthesis. It's fast absorption and has high bioavailability. That means what you consume you actually get into the body, right? Plant proteins on the other hand are of course dairy free and vegan friendly, environmentally better sustainable. They are rich in fiber and antioxidants, right? And they have fewer hormonal concerns. That's because hormones from non-grass fed cows will creep into the cow's milk and then into the whey. That is of course not the case with plant proteins. The cons for whey proteins are GI issues that we already talked about, right? Bloating and gas, especially in pure whey concentrates and with all those additives. Lactose intolerance is again a major problem. Again, whey isolate can mitigate some of this. There is some amount of allergen risk. Then it's not, of course, vegan friendly, and there is potential for hormone exposure, and that could affect your health as well. Plant protein cons are, it's generally incomplete amino acid profile unless you're mixing pea and rice and many other types of proteins. It definitely has lower leucine content unless somebody is spiking it, which is again not good. It's grainy in texture and taste. It's not so easy to consume. It doesn't mix so well in water, and you will definitely need a blender for that. There are digestibility issues as well. People frequently complain of constipation when they start plant proteins, and there is definite risk of heavy metal contamination, especially if you are using soya-based plant protein substitute. So these are the pros and cons. Like I said, I have talked about these in whey protein purity calculators, and then also the top 5 whey brands, which a lot of you might have already seen, right? So which one should I choose, which one should I not choose, and whey versus plant, and which is the best product is something that you can take a look at with some of these previous lectures. The last we are going to talk about is the timing of protein supplement. Does it matter? Should I take it in the morning? Should I take it with lunch? Should I take it at bedtime? So many questions. So many people say you must drink whey immediately after a workout or early in the morning. So within 30 minutes of your workout, you have to take that whey. So what does the science say? The truth is that the 30-minute anabolic window that we're talking about is largely a myth, right? So what really matters is total daily protein intake. Are you actually matching your requirements, right? And distribution across meals is helpful, like I've already told you in a few slides in the past. So timing is flexible if you're meeting daily needs. The science is that muscle remains sensitive to protein even 48 hours after exercise, not just 30 minutes. Best practice is spread protein evenly across 3 to 4 meals, right? So absorption is better, bioavailability is better, muscles can use it better. So for each meal, maybe about 40 grams of high quality protein. It maximizes this muscle protein synthesis, right? So that's pretty much what the science says. So when timing does matter a bit is immediately post workout. It may help if you are trained, if you are trained in a fasted state. If you are already doing intermittent fasting, say 16/8 or maybe 18/6, and that you haven't consumed any protein for at least 4 to 6 hours, then maybe you should take it right after your exercise. And then perhaps you won't again eat after several hours. Say for example, I have my meals at 2 p.m. and then again at 8 p.m. Right after 8 p.m., I'm going to go for my run at say 5:36 in the morning, and I'm going to eat straight away at 2 p.m. again in the afternoon. So then I haven't had meals for almost 10 hours. Then I have run, and then I'm not going to eat again for the next 6 hours, right? So for me, it makes sense to have it within 30 minutes of my workout. But if you're not doing intermittent fasting and all of that, perhaps does not matter. There is no need to rush. So overall take home is, don't stress the clock, hit your daily protein goals, and that's very important. The time perhaps may not matter, and that your muscles are not sitting with a stopwatch like that image in the background shows. So overall take home message: protein does not raise uric acid, does not damage normal kidneys. Bloating is mainly because of lactose, and the biggest culprits are the additives and sweeteners. So switch to pure isolate, maybe unflavored one, and I'm sure you will do better. Protein is for everyone. It's not just for gym goers, bodybuilders and athletes, and I've given you plenty of examples of that. And definitely proteins are not steroids. Other macros are also important. Whey versus plant is something that you need to choose. Whey is the default, but sometimes plant protein may be good for you as well. And timing does not matter. So I hope you liked this presentation, and that if you haven't subscribed, you will subscribe to the channel and keep me motivated. And thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.